Book 5 Chapter 49. As we walked back to the loft with our bounty of 1970s general store groceries, I still felt nervous about bringing newcomers to our base. It was just an inherently risky thing to do. We had dotted our I's and crossed our T's, but at the end of the day, all we could do was stick to the plan. And the plan involved creating a robust stable of players we could use to beat the game at Carousel. That was the task looming far in the distance, somewhere past my current goal of rescuing Anna and Camden. We would have to attempt to escape Carousel and trigger its thrill line. I took a deep breath to push away the stress, and I could tell the three new players read something into it because, whatever they were talking about, they stopped. Isaac was practicing navigating with his scouting trop. He didn't seem to notice anything that wasn't an omen. "So, what's next?" Andrew asked after a beat. "What's the current mission?" "There's a whole list," I said. A long list that grew every time I thought about it. As I walked down the road, my arms loaded with groceries packed into paper bags, a hole formed in one of the bags, and a glass bottle of ketchup popped out. I stopped and grabbed the bottle. It hadn't broken, and though the bag now had a hole in it, it still seemed secure enough to contain everything else. The puncture was not catastrophic. I simply popped the ketchup bottle into my hoodie pocket. The thing was, it was a little big for the pocket, but of course, it slipped right inside with no problem. This didn't go unnoticed. I remembered that these players didn't know about luggage tags, which allowed you to create a bag of holding, so to speak. I had used mine to give my hoodie pockets more room than they should have had. I was about due for another because I was close to my weight limit, but anything that could fit into the opening of my pocket could be contained in there up to the weight limit. It wasn't such a remarkable magic trick that any of them said anything at first, but they did look at each other funny as the large ketchup bottle just seemed to disappear. It didn't look like it was being shoved into my pocket. It looked like it fell in, like I had opened up a hole and dropped it. Before picking up the bags again, I reached into my pocket and withdrew one of the halves of my head shears, the ones with the drop attached to them, and then I drew the other half out. They were basically a giant pair of scissors, and they disconnected at the bolt that connected them when I loosened it. I reattached them, tightened the bolt, and watched as Andrew, Michael, and Lila looked on in amazement. I remembered doing something similar with Cassie and Isaac when they arrived, but all I had were cans of Dr. Pepper, and they looked at me like I was some dorky magician playing a prank on them. The head shears were a lot stronger of a flourish, especially since they had a drop on them, and up until that moment, none of these players had seen an item with a drop before. That was a new thing in Carousel. Even the Atlas didn't have information on these. "Things have changed a bit," I said as I disassembled the head shears and put them back in my pocket. "How are you doing that?" Michael asked. I explained luggage tags, but I couldn't show them the actual tag because I was currently using mine. "We have some catching up to do," I said, and suddenly, I felt optimistic. Giving fallen players the bad news that they had been sacrificed for a worthy cause was a downer, even if the conclusion was ultimately optimistic. Showing them the new toys we had to play with was more fun. I picked up my bags, careful to make sure the tear wasn't spreading, and we continued our way to the loft. Whoever was working the telescope spotted us before we got to the loft, so we were greeted in the restaurant down below. Isaac and Cassie were happy that everything was coming together for them. Their brother was back with them. I was happy to see them being happy. I wondered if I would get to feel that. Lila immediately noticed that there were no omens in the restaurant, which would seem strange because most places with lots of foot traffic did have omens. Kimberly softly said, "You're safe here." And they talked quietly. "It's like the kitchens at Camp Dyer," Andrew said. "Tell me, are we able to eat the food provided here?" Because at Camp Dyer, we could eat whatever the campers were eating, and no one would stop us. "All the chili dogs you could ever want," Michael said. It was heaven on earth. I remembered those chili dogs. Heaven? They were not. That wasn't even to mention the fact that they only fed those kids once or twice a month. Poor things. The bottom line was that we couldn't have survived at Camp Dyer on chili dogs alone. "You have to buy the food here," Cassie explained. It's not super expensive, but it really adds up over time. Not exactly, Isaac said. You can eat the food that the NPCs don't eat, that they're about to throw away, but if you steal any of their food before then, it ends up on your bill the next time you order something. He had been experimenting. I don't think we need to eat out of the garbage, Isaac, Andrew said. If so, we wouldn't have brought all of this. He stretched out his arms, which were as stacked with paper sacks of food as mine were. Michael had taken wheelbarrow duty and brought a few cases of beer because he didn't have anyone to tell him not to. Thank you for grocery shopping, Kimberly said. But tonight, I say we eat at the restaurant. After all, we did just get a big payday. We sure had. Rescuing players was good money. After weeks of scrimping by, we had hundreds of dollars in the till. Sounds like dinner's on you, Michael said as he eyed a waitress walking across the room carrying a plate with a T-bone steak on it. Carousel did have the best meats. No one mentioned the awkwardness of Lila. No one wanted to. At the end of the day, if we decided we were going to trust her, inasmuch as we could say we trusted Lila, then we had to go with it. We couldn't keep bringing up doubts. That would destroy cohesion. That was our decision, and we would go with it until somebody burned us. We just had to hope it wouldn't be soon. We ate like kings and queens that night. Isaac had found a fishing pole at Bobby's place. I had no idea where he had managed to find it. He said it was up in the rafters, but I still didn't know what he was referring to until he explained that he had climbed into the attic. I didn't know there was an attic. The house wasn't big enough to have a full attic. It was more of a crawl space. The fishing pole was kind of like the telescope we found at the loft. It had an omen detecting ability. I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as useful, though. It was an adventurer trope called Strange Attractor, a play on the cliché from movies in which compasses acted oddly around supernatural phenomena and often pointed the way to the source of some arcane or sci-fi energy. It would cause the compass to point toward an omen, or if you were in a story, it would point toward some strange source of power. Of course, the trope wasn't attached to a compass. It was attached to a fishing pole. And Isaac proudly demonstrated that if you let out a little bit of line, the hook would attract toward omens. He dangled it off the roof and instructed us to watch as the lure pulled across the street and pointed toward a disgruntled postman who was indeed an omen. And it's so convenient, Ant-Man said, not like this bulky telescope. Everyone laughed at that, even Isaac, because he was having a good time with his discovery. I supposed the fishing pole was a mismatch with its trope unless you were searching for a powerful object underwater. I had to wonder why Carousel would make such a thing and what real practical use it had. It went to show that perhaps not every trope object we found was going to be super convenient like the telescope, or heck, even the hedge shears. You have to wonder if we're going to find a way to make our own trope items, I said. It does really get the juices flowing, Andrew said. The possibilities. They had been quiet guests as they got used to their new abode. It was the middle of the night when we got a knock at our door. Lila was sleeping in the back bedroom where Cassie had been, who was now with Dinah. Lila had offered to sleep in the open living room space as if she was submitting herself for inspection and didn't want to be seen as secretive. Because of the late night knocks, we didn't want her near the front door. We said we'd trust her, but having her sleep next to the omen spawn point seemed too trusting. Andrew bunked with Isaac, and Michael slept on the roof because, as Andrew put it, he had an aversion to comfort, something psychological, like he thought it was bad luck. I didn't mind someone sleeping in the living room. After all, the loft was probably designed as an open-concept living area before hallways and bedrooms were attached to it. There was plenty of room for a player to bunk, and one day, when we got enough furniture, we might be able to screen off a section for them. As I walked through the dark loft, I contemplated how many people we were going to try to squeeze into this base. We might end up with a lot of people living in the open living room. I waited for the others to get out of bed. Eventually, they all did, except for Michael, who was on the roof and didn't hear the knocking. Isaac came out of his room with the fishing pole, the lure hanging in front of him. It pulled as if magnetically toward the door. "I think there's an omen out there," he whispered, barely suppressing his chuckle. I wasn't exactly in a joking mood. No one was, so Isaac quietly put the fishing pole down against the wall, walked to the door, and looked out the peephole. He had gotten some practice at this and didn't feel the need for me to take a look as well to get a second opinion. Maybe he was showing off for his brother. "The image of the hallway sure does look crooked," Isaac said. Then, there was a pause as he read something on the red wallpaper. That was the way his scouting trap worked. He had to point out that an omen looked obviously dangerous, and then he would get information about it. He was clearly having trouble figuring out what to say to send the omen away. I didn't want to embarrass him, but I thought I'd take a crack at it. I quietly walked up beside him, being careful not to be in the blast path of Dinah's shotgun, and took a look outside. I understood what he meant when he said the hallway looked crooked. At first, I thought it was something like a serial killer holding up a picture of the hallway so that we would think no one was there and it was crooked, but that wasn't what he meant. He meant the hallway was crooked in the way that some psychological horror haunted houses were, like House of Leaves or 1408. I looked at the red wallpaper, trying to figure out what to do with this omen, because just by looking at it, I felt some sort of effect, disorientation. The storyline was called The Fourth Floor, and the omen, of course, was staring at the impossible architecture that was now the hallway outside our front door. How did we send it away? The hint of how not to activate the omen, which was how my scouting ability worked in combination with Kimberly's writ of habitation, said simply, "Ignore the fine details." I turned to Isaac and said, "I don't know what you're looking at out there. It's just a hallway." I gave him a friendly smack on the arm and walked away from the door. If this were a normal omen, you would enter it by staring at the strangeness of the hallway's design and how it didn't quite make sense logically or within the realm of physics. To get it to go away, we just had to ignore it. That was the best I could figure. Made sense enough to me. Everyone still stood frozen, unsure of whether the omen was gone. After all, something had knocked at the door, and that something could not be heard walking away like a normal omen knocking at that door would. From what I could tell, the storyline was about a haunted place. Rather than ghosts, a haunted place was itself some sort of evil, so the knock had not likely come from a human hand but rather from some ambiguous living evil. Of course, that wasn't very satisfying. And it just so happened that I found the answer to my question from earlier that day. What exactly was the use of a fishing pole whose lure moved toward omens and powerful things? It was as if Carousel had answered my question. Was Carousel being playful again, sending evil architecture at us? You could use it to tell if an evil hallway was gone. I gestured for Isaac to pick up his fishing pole, and as he did, the lure moved toward the door. But after 30 seconds or so, it dropped away, pulled only by gravity. The evil hallway was gone. "That's the show, folks," I said as I went back to my room. Sometimes, I just had to will myself to get used to things. And evil hallways were just one of them. Book 5 Chapter 50. It was incredible how life could move forward so quickly and yet seemingly stay the same. Days earlier, we had completed our first rescue. Before we could be satisfied with our success, we had to worry about the whole Lila fiasco. But then I woke up one day not so long after, and she was in the kitchen making eggs for everyone. It was a special morning for me because I woke up to the sound of laughter from a few rooms away. That hadn't happened in a long while, maybe not since Camp Dyer. As I opened my eyes, I smiled, not because I heard the joke, but because I could tell the atmosphere was improving. Just by adding 3 new players, we were building our own little camp. After I got out of my room and did my morning routine, I came into the living room and figured out what they were all laughing at. "Kimberly, I'm telling you, you have to sign on to this movie if you are looking for something new, something you've never done. And you have never done it because it is complete nonsense. No one knows what's happening, and everyone will say it's smarter than it is just because it's confusing, and you'll get accolades if you succeed. Of course, if you fail, I may not be able to take your calls anymore. That's just business, dear. You understand? If you pull it off, though, it will instantly elevate your career. Just don't answer reporters' questions about the plot, because then they'll know you're in over your head. It was Kimberly's fake talent agent, Sal. He was always good for a laugh. Of course, if you do decide to take it, just know it is going to be one of the biggest acting challenges of your life, and there's a very real chance it might not score well with audiences. Keeping the timeline straight will be difficult for everyone, including the screenwriter, Sal said. But at the end, all that matters is that you beat the bad guy, right? That's how these movies go. I'm told, though, that it does have some pretty squeamish scenes. But if you're very lucky, you won't be in any of them. Timeline and squeamish scenes? I knew immediately which movie Sal was talking about. Well, anyway, sweetheart, that's all I have to say. If you have any more questions, please be sure to call, Sal said. Kimberly said her goodbyes and hung up the phone. As I walked further into the room, I saw that Andrew, Antoine, and most of the others were hovering around the kitchen table, listening to Kimberly's call. We should have recorded that, Andrew said. We should have recorded all of the various calls to see what differences there were. Are we able to call again? He was discovering the incredible potential of her scouting trop. Yeah, Kimberly said. He doesn't seem to remember past phone calls. He's always happy to hear from me. I had slept in by a few hours. It seemed like they were already getting to work while eating cheesy eggs. If there was one thing Easton Carousel General Store had, it was eggs. Post-traumatic? I asked. We were always looking for new information about that storyline because one day, we were going to rescue our friends from it. Kimberly nodded. My rescue trop works on it, we think. So does Antoine's, she said. Sal kind of references them. He didn't have as much to say about mine, though, Antoine added. That might mean it's a higher level. We had discovered that if Kimberly asked her agent about a storyline while one of us had a rescue trop equipped, then Sal would talk about the altered rescue version instead of the original. It was helpful to compare them. Did you get any good info? I asked. They all looked at each other, tilting their heads, shrugging their shoulders, that sort of thing. It's pretty high level, Antoine said. We didn't get much, not much more than we already knew. Bummer. That was pretty much what always happened with post-traumatic. I decided to help myself to the last remaining cheesy eggs in the pan, at least the part that hadn't gone crusty yet. Then I walked over to them, scooping the eggs into my mouth right off the paper plate. I have an idea, I said. And what's that? Antoine asked. We'll need to take a walk, I said. I had a theory for learning things about post-traumatic, but unlike Kimberly, I couldn't do it from a long distance. I had to be looking at the Omen itself. The airport was about halfway between downtown and Easton Carousel, so it was not a bad walk, but definitely not a short one. The roller rink, which occasionally disappeared, was right next to the airport. That was the Omen we were after. Lila had offered to open up some sound stages for us to travel through, but as cool as that sounded, from the way she described it, it was also a lot more walking. I figured the faster we were done with this, the better. So, we walked in one big group out of the more densely populated part of Carousel into the more small-town outskirts. The street looked like any street that could be found in any small town back home, or, heck, probably anywhere in the real world. Except this one brought back memories. As we were walking past a neighborhood that was probably middle to lower middle class, I spotted a structure in the backyard of one of the houses. It was a shed. Even without all of the black snow all over the ground, I recognized it. It was Reggie's shed. That was as far as he had been able to make it into the black snow, as far as I could tell, but then again, I only got to watch the trailer for the apocalypse, not the whole thing. When the black snow apocalypse had been sent, for whatever reason it had been sent, Reggie Vargas, a bruiser, one of the vets at Camp Dyer and member of the bowlers team, had sacrificed himself to help Anna and Camden get into a storyline so that they would not die from the apocalypse. Anna had made sure to note his sacrifice in her letter to us, which was attached to the back of Silas, the mechanical showman. One day, We would be able to rescue Anna and Camden and make his sacrifice worth it. I hoped we would rescue him, too. A flood of memories came over me of the bowlers and how they helped make Camp Dyer seem so normal. Grace loved to cook and was whip smart, keeping her team of bruisers in line against all odds. Of course, they were all gone now. I had seen Reggie's fate, or at least part of it, thanks to my coming to a theater near Litrpg. I had seen him bunker down in that shed. "Is it an omen?" Antoine asked as he caught me staring. I shook my head. "We're almost there," I said. I didn't need to share that sad memory with them again. As we crested a small hill, the tiny Carousel airport appeared in the distance. Far before it was the corner lot where the roller rink stood. It was blinking like normal, sometimes existing, sometimes nothing more than a large pit in the earth. "All right, everyone," I said. "I've never messed around with this before, but we're going to try to be as scientific as possible." I looked back down at the roller rink and then cleared my throat. "We're going to take all of the highest level players we have, that's me, Antoine, Kimberly, Bobby, and Andrew. The rest of you, stay up here. Lila and Isaac, keep your eyes out for omens." I had explained my plans briefly. Still, most of them looked either on edge or terrified to be out in Carousel proper without protection. With that, we split up. Those who I grouped with myself walked down the hill toward the roller rink, and the rest stood there watching. "Exactly how far apart do we have to be for this to work?" Ant-Man asked. "Just a bit further, I think," I said. The establishment's name was Carousel Roller Days. Its design and decor were like something from another decade, but that made sense, as Post-Traumatic was a time-travel horror movie. I kept my eye on the red wallpaper. My "I don't like it here" trop gave me a rough estimate of how difficult a storyline was, but that estimate was based on my current party. I had a hunch it wasn't just about pure levels. I thought it factored in everything, like archetypes or equipped tropes. We were about to find out. Ever since we had figured out that Kimberly's talent agent trop could give a different answer depending on what tropes were equipped, I had been wondering if we could use the same thing for my scouting trop. I had collected all of the highest level players. As we walked further down the hill, I became confident that we had finally separated from the others enough that my reading would be just about us and not include the players at the top of the hill. I looked at the flickering roller rink and stared at its poster on the red wallpaper. Post-traumatic registered as this as scaring me, which was one of the most dangerous levels that my trop would tell me. Of course, I was mostly guessing based on the innate fear and anxiety that my trop gave me, but I was pretty confident that this was a very dangerous storyline. It wasn't the most dangerous, but it was a contender. We were easily outleveled by 10 plot armor or more. "Kimberly, equip your rescue trop." She quickly did. The difficulty increased. Not only could I see it jump all the way to get to the car now, but I could feel it getting more difficult in an instant, perhaps because I was focused on it. The anxiety hit me in the back of the neck, and I subconsciously stretched my shoulders, contorting myself, trying to ease the stress. "So it obviously got more difficult," I said, "but it's always going to do that for a rescue trop. Could you unequip it?" Kimberly nodded and did as I asked. Unfortunately, the storyline was so much stronger than us that this exercise might have been in vain. It was difficult to tell how much more challenging the storyline would be when it was already topping out the meter. "Antoine," I said. He nodded and equipped his race against time trop. The difficulty kicked back up, but this time, I felt it was more extreme. My heart started to beat. It wasn't quite as bad as hearing the breathing from the axe murderer, but I could feel that even though they both registered as get to the car now, Antoine's was more difficult. "Okay," I said. "Now it's my turn." Antoine unequipped his rescue trop, and I equipped mine, the wrong reel. And in an instant, I felt relief. I swore I did. It still registered as get to the car now, on the red wallpaper, but it was definitely less difficult than Antoine's. If I had to guess, Kimberly's rescue trop and mine were about equal in difficulty when used on post-traumatic. I relayed my findings to the others. Exactly how large is this experiment going to get? Andrew asked. If I'm not mistaken, this technique could be used to fine-tune all of the tropes we equip and which players we take. That's what I was thinking, I said. I don't know if this trop is sensitive enough to tell minor differences, but it can tell major differences. And if it reacts to individual tropes equipped and not just rescue tropes, that could be huge. Right now, what I'm concerned with is party composition. We're high savvy, moxie, and hustle right now. If I were to guess, that's probably a good combination for a time travel horror. Well, let's test that theory, Andrew said. He began walking away all the way up the hill. When he got there, he sent Michael back down to us. Now, we had 2 melee archetypes and 1 less savvy-based archetype. And with that one switch, the storyline jumped up to get to the car now. Even without a rescue trap equipped. So, the theory was well-founded that the storyline was mainly about speed and intelligence. Alright, I said. Let's mix and match. We spent 30 minutes just swapping people out to see what builds worked well with post-traumatic. It was far from an exact science because things like the tropes we had equipped or the level differences we had would play majorly into the difficulty rating my scouting trop gave. But broadly, it was still very useful information. From this, we determined that our initial hypothesis was mostly correct. We needed savvy and hustle. Moxie and metal were not so important, and it was difficult to tell how vital grit was with this method, but I had to assume it was, given what I knew about the storyline. After all, I had seen that Camden had lost his arm, and the storyline involved some torture. Grit really helped the torture go down easier. We could play around forever trying to lower the storyline's difficulty rating, but at the end of the day, my I don't like it here trop just wasn't sensitive enough to help fine-tune our builds on a storyline that difficult. Once we had leveled up, I suspected I would get a more accurate reading. Overall, it was still giving us good information. The technique would be really useful for storylines closer to our level. We walked back to the loft with our heads held high. Even though we hadn't accomplished all that much, it still felt like we were taking steps forward. And that was great because we had a lot of steps to go. It was afternoon, and we were on the roof of the loft, lounging. Bobby was playing with his dogs, and his dogs were playing with everyone, whether they liked it or not. It was a sunny day. If there's one thing I appreciated about the new players, it's that Andrew was just as neurotic about discussing our plans for the future as I was. Of course, he was more or less focused on only one thing, rescuing his teammates who had gotten killed in the werewolf lair. I couldn't blame him. We had spent all day worrying about my teammates who had gotten killed in a storyline. But getting Logan and Avery, his teammates, was a lot more complicated because we didn't know what storyline those werewolves were from. If we could figure that out, we could rescue them, assuming they were in a storyline we could beat. But figuring out what storyline they were in was an enormous task for us. And we had so much more to think about. Look, I said, there's a lot on the to-do list. We need to get more writs of habitation, for one. We were sat out at a table under an umbrella. And how do we accomplish that? Andrew asked as he sipped on a yellow cocktail that someone had made him. I had one, too, but mine was murky brown. We didn't have a mixologist on staff. Isaac and Michael had been experimenting. According to the Atlas, if we want to be awarded writs of habitation, we have to run storylines where our characters are assigned habitable bases and have to spend the night at least once. Even then, the base has to come into the story theoretically. That shouldn't be too difficult, Andrew said. I feel like there are plenty of overnight storylines. Lots of them, it would seem, I said. There doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason for when they're handed out, other than that. We have to wait until Carousel is feeling generous. Okay, what else do we have to do? He asked. We need more rescue tropes, I said. I think Carousel limited rescue tropes after we rescued you because it wanted variety, not because it wanted us to stop doing rescues. But that means we need more tropes. And how do we get those? Andrew asked. We run storylines that involve rescuing someone as part of the base story, I said. Makes sense, Andrew said. I can certainly see us working that into our future plans. I would argue that rescuing Logan and Avery would be very helpful, even toward that goal. Having two operational, high-level teams would make every aspect of this base and any other base that we occupy run smoother. Look, Andrew, I'm not against the idea of rescuing your friends. I want you to manage your expectations. We're going to work our tails off to figure out what storyline they're in, and we may fail. And even if we do succeed, there's a good chance we won't be able to rescue them still, if the storyline is too tough. I understand that, he said, but I think that they deserve our full devotion. After all, we have learned that your friends are in too high level of a storyline for us to dream of beating right now. If it turns out that Logan and Avery's storyline is more realistic, it would be a godsend. That was true. Post-traumatic was too high level for us. Most every other time I had taken on a higher level story, there had been at least one ringer on the team who was already high level. If we tried to take on that storyline anytime soon, we would likely lose. I had an anxiety building up that we would work to figure out what storyline Logan and Avery were trapped behind, and that when we found it was too high level, Andrew and Michael might become disheartened or uncooperative. They had not done anything to make me think that was the case yet, but I still worried. Whatever the case, I said, we definitely need to rescue more players in general. Isaac and Ramona are almost too low level to even meaningfully contribute to most runs with the rest of us. Andrew took a sip of his drink. Trying to find a team of low-level players doesn't sound easy. We have plenty to choose from, I said. A huge chunk of those missing posters are for newbies. Wouldn't be surprised if some of them never even learned what was going on here. That might be better, Andrew said. It's easier to fill an empty cup. He was right. Being the first point of contact for new players was better all around, better for them and better for us. After a few moments of silence, I said, the Atlas has over a dozen werewolf stories in it that I could tell from the non-spoilers section, none of which seem to be a match for our culprits, and that is not exhaustive. There are likely more. You're sure you can't remember what the title of the storyline was? I'm trying my best, Andrew said. I remember there being a title, but I was so focused on running that I never really gave the red wallpaper much mind. I could understand that. After all, most players didn't need to keep an eye on the red wallpaper as aggressively as I did with my oblivious bystander strategy. It could be extremely difficult to use your eyes and look at the red wallpaper. Was the title long or short? I asked. Can you remember that much? Andrew put his head in his hands and moved his fingers through his hair. I can't, he said, but I don't think it was short. It was one of those where the title was really small at the top, but the top was covered with other things, too. It was just a character poster, after all, not one of the main movie posters. Right, I said. Guess that means one thing. What's that? He asked. Tomorrow we're going shopping. Andrew looked at me funny, but before he could say anything, someone else beat him to it. Did you say we're going shopping? Kimberly asked, having just made her way over to our table. That is wonderful. I know that you like your hoodie, but there are so many better options. Not that kind of shopping, I said. We'll see, she said with a smile. Then she turned her attention to Andrew. Her expression changed, and her voice softened as she asked if she could speak to him for a moment. She gestured over toward Antoine, who was on the other side of the roof, leaning against the railing and looking very annoyed. Andrew politely excused himself and followed Kimberly back across the roof. I wondered how long it would take him to find out that one of the reasons he was alive was because he might be able to help Antoine with his mostly well-concealed PTSD. Andrew had at least one helpful trop. It would be another band-aid on top of a stack of other band-aids, and together, they could be something like a cure. Whatever the case, I had done enough that day to call it a success. I cuddled up in my hoodie in the shade and went to sleep. Book 5 Chapter 51 I stood in the middle of a large stone corridor, like something out of Hogwarts to my eye. Fancy stonework. No formed concrete. Yet, these walls were not for some royal courtyard. They were storefronts. On either side, there were 8 to 10 glass doors with big glass windows packed with goods to draw customers in. The only exit out of the corridor I could find was the same way we came in. This was a kill box. If something were to chase you into this place, you'd have to gamble on which door you entered, hoping there was an exit hidden from view. To my right, I saw a large glass window that had once been filled with mannequins dressed for a 1970s summer at the beach, bright colors, a fair amount of modesty, and a wave of nostalgia I had only experienced secondhand through movies. All of the displays had been crushed, however, and standing on their remains were dozens of aimless zombies, the blue and green kind from back when rotten flesh was considered too obscene for movies, who pressed against the glass half-heartedly. I always thought the non-rotten ones were creepier. Maybe that was because as people rot, they get lighter. A fully desiccated corpse only weighed about 40 pounds. I would know. I wrestled with one. These zombies were still wholly hydrated. They were barely dead. I'd hate to mess with them. They didn't draw in any customers. This store, the only one whose door was locked and chained, had once sold summer water sports equipment and beach attire but was now a monster lair for wandering cretins waiting for their storyline to be triggered. I could feel the monster lair with my hysterics scouting trap so easily with all of the monsters right in front of me. If only the werewolves were on display like this. "Are you sure that glass is going to hold?" I asked, looking over at Kimberly. It was flexing. "It always has," she said. "It's best just not to look at them." Laura said the only way to clear them out is to either open the door, break the window, or run their storyline, but honestly, I don't really want to shop there anyway. "I don't know," I said. "Summer's coming up." "That's a good point," she said. "I do like that shawl." I followed her eyes to a pink zombie wearing a sheer floral robe of some sort. It gave her that just out of the pool look. I laughed. Kimberly would know better than I would about whether the glass would hold the undead back. The Mangler Outlet Mall had been a go-to spot back in the days of Camp Dyer. I never went, but eye candies, final girls, and anyone who cared about the clothes they wore knew the routine. We couldn't go to the actual mall because we'd die swiftly, but the outlet mall was a great alternative, a small taste of the kinds of stores that could be found in the real world. Of course, the place was designed like a nightmare. From the outside, it was a building with ornate stone walls defaced with advertisements for the stores inside. The problem was that the building wrapped around a corridor that was shaped like a U, with the shops wrapped around the corridor where the shoppers were. You entered at one end of the U, and the other end was a dead end with 2 blind corners to get both in and out. I hated it as a scout. Though it would make a fine base. We could only get to the stores by entering the corridor. It would be a terrible place to get caught in an apocalypse, a storyline, or heck, if somebody busted that glass and let the zombies out. I led the charge at first, getting a lay of the land and an idea of where the omens were and then opening it up for shopping for the others. It really wasn't too bad if everyone was on the same page. In fact, there was something oddly asthma about listening to the moaning zombies mixed with the soft shopping music of the outlet mall. I didn't care what Kimberly said, I couldn't stand near them. I moved, careful to keep all of the players and omens in sight. The others were a lot more interested in the stores than I was. When I said that we were going shopping, I was talking about going to the special shops related to the actual game at Carousel, not to these superfluous retail outlets. But Carousel had revamped these stores from their previous state. With the addition of drop items, even these mundane shops could be interesting. "There's a dollar store up on the right," Kimberly said. She had this place memorized. Back in the days of Camp Dyer, players would go here to shop in huge groups. They would be loaded to the gills with firearms and other weapons, of course. We were the same way. I carried my special hedge shears in my hands, gripped tightly, ready for the moment I had to lop a head off. We weren't all clumped together like we normally were when we traveled. This was largely a safe place, and it felt safe because there were lots of NPCs just going about their lives here, ignoring the shop filled with zombies, of course. Traveling had recently become even more manageable, given that we now had 3 whole people with scouting tropes capable of seeing omens with little difficulty. Lila's trap was on par with mine as far as showing omens, and Isaac's was usable if he paid attention. He would probably have to increase his savvy stat quite a bit before it became as usable as ours, if it ever would. Lila was taking a joy in being helpful. Maybe she thought that was her path to true forgiveness. It wasn't a bad theory. I already appreciated her. Her teammates needed time. Andrew was civil and even friendly to her, but he wanted his missing teammates back. That was all he cared about. "There's a candy store over there," Kimberly said, "and an electronics store up here." She pointed further down the corridor. At first, I thought she was talking to everyone, but she was talking to me. Maybe she thought that was my jam, candy and electronics. The electronics place was called the Bare Wire. While it had a showroom at the front of the store, I could see through the window that there were stacks of electronics in the back. Even at a glance, there were drop items, although I couldn't quite focus on them enough to know what they were. I wanted to go in there. It was odd. I felt I needed to look around. I didn't know where those feelings came from. The place was depressing, frankly. Still, I knew I would make a voyage there. "The dollar store looks like it's been wrecked," Bubby noted. "Yeah, all dollar stores do," Isaac said. From what I could see, the dollar store didn't have any drop items, or any good clothes, obviously, but it did have toiletries and other quality-of-life items that couldn't be found in any of the retail stores. Kimberly's goal was a clothes store at the very end of the corridor, which apparently had a wide variety. We were still on the first arm of the U and needed to make 2 more turns to get there. I didn't have the freedom to shop wherever I wanted because I had to keep my eyes open for omens. Not only were there omens inside the stores, but occasionally, mobile omens traveled around with the NPCs, like the man, hastily dressed, who ran through the crowd, being chased by men in suits who yelled for him to stop and radioed each other government agent jargon as they went along. The secret with him was not to let him bump into you because he would slip something into your shopping bag. Later, the government guys would do whatever it took to retrieve it from you after they viewed the security footage and realized you had it. Luckily, that omen was easy to defuse because even if you put whatever the object was inside your shopping bag, you could just take it out and drop it on the ground, and no bad would happen. You'd be off the hook. The Atlas had told me that. As I was reading that omen, I must have been smiling because Ramona gave me a funny look. I told everyone in earshot not to let the guy bump into them or put anything in their bags, and then I continued watching for other omens. "So that's an omen, too." "They're literally everywhere," she said. "They are," I said. "Just gotta keep an eye out, and we'll be fine." I thought that she was scared, but that wasn't quite right. "We used to come here when I was a kid," she said. "Course, there were no zombies. It was just an ordinary place." She had grown up in a slightly altered version of Carousel, where omens were either non-existent or subdued. That was never made clear. "I imagine this place really lights up around Christmas time," I said. "I had memories of Christmas shopping in a place like this." She nodded. "This is a great place to grow up, as funny as that might sound now," she said. We talked for a while as people browsed. We were making our way forward, and Ramona was only interested in buying new clothes, even though she didn't have that much money. "So you guys have Christmas?" I asked. They didn't have our brand names, but they somehow shared some of our holidays. They also had a bunch we didn't, of course. "Yeah," she said. "And what is that holiday about?" I asked. "Mistletoe and presents and caroling," she said, "that sort of thing. If you're nice, you get gifts from Santa. If you're bad, you get dragged out of your bed and eaten, you know, just things that parents tell children." The more she talked, the more I realized that when I said Christmas, she didn't understand it to mean the same thing I did. Christmas was not a holiday here, not really. It was a setting for horror movies synonymous with winter and the solstice. Religion was incidental. I tried to probe deeper into this subject, but it seemed that we were so far apart in our understanding of what religion was that I just got more confused. After all, Carousel had bundled together thousands of cults and scripted them to act like a pseudo-monotheistic culture. It was a dense and confusing subject, but hey, religion always is. There are lots of religions, Ramona said, the children of Yashina, the followers of the hooded god. I was raised to believe it was rude to ask about that kind of stuff, though, and they mostly keep to themselves. The more she talked, the more it sounded like Silas Dearcon's version of Carousel was deeply complicated. At least Carousel proper didn't pretend it was a real town beneath the surface, but whatever Silas had created for his through line had barely been coherent, and yet, to Ramona, it was perfectly normal. "Do you want some candy?" she asked, glancing over at the window front where a man was pulling pitch-black taffy. "Absolutely," I said. "We just have to stay to the back of the group to watch out for omens." The candy store had a bunch of omens, as would be imagined. They were simple to avoid. "Just so you know, I'm not eating anything from here," I said, "but I do like the idea of looking at the candy." "Oh, that's probably a good point," she said. "I didn't even think about that. Some of these are omens, aren't they?" "Like 50% of it is omens," I said. "That is a bummer." "Show me," she said. "Do you see this apple with the glistening green candy coating?" I asked. We stood in front of a small display where lots of apples, apparently freshly made, were stuck out on sticks. Each of them was collectively an omen, yet little NPC children grabbed them and put them in their bags. NPC privilege was real when it came to not triggering omens. Ramona stared at the apples. "Oh my gosh, how did I not see that?" she eventually said. "Yeah, you gotta let your eyes go blurry and focus on what's in your head," I said. "Of course, I don't have to worry about that because my trop makes them jump out at me." "Stepmother," Ramona read off the red wallpaper. "That's right," I said. The poster showed a well-dressed homemaker holding one of the candy apples as if it were a flower or something. The picture cut her off at her neck so that I couldn't see her face. "So don't eat the apple," Ramona said. "Don't eat the apple," I repeated. Beyond that, there was a great deal of candy that didn't have an omen attached to it, like candied shrunken heads, which were essentially giant gummy treats, or red sugar powder that was meant to be scooped out of a pouch with your fingers. When you licked the powder off, it left a blood-red residue. "Is all of this candy poisoned?" Ramona asked. I was hoping to get some of those chocolate orange treats. They were my favorite growing up. "No, of course not. Some of it just has razor blades in it, and there's a thumb in that pop bottle over there. So, not all poison," I said. "The orange chocolates look fine if you want to risk it." Ramona looked very disappointed. Another tainted relic of her previous life. The candy's grotesque theme wouldn't have bothered her because she was born and raised around it. "Tell you what," I said. "We'll find a storyline one of these days that takes place near here, and then we'll come inside this candy store and plunder it, because then it will be safe." "You're sure?" she asked. "Everything that I know tells me it'll be okay, although this outlet mall has some tough storylines, so it may be a while. But we'll try." She smiled, and we left the sugary horrors behind as a mother bought a pop with a thumb for her kid. We slowly made our way deeper into the outlet mall. It was still early morning, and the sun was not yet overhead. The corridor widened at the bottom of the U, and there were some tables with umbrellas set out for people to eat at. A few generic restaurants were situated there, but we weren't there for lunch. We had all grouped up around one of the tables. As far as I could tell, no one had actually bought anything yet. They were mostly window shopping and trying to find the trop items, but no one had found anything they wanted. "Is the food here safe to eat?" Cassie asked. "Yes, but don't order a number 6 from the noodle place, it's a tough omen." "I'm not even sure what's going on there," I said. Buying food in Carousel was always an option, and unlike the candy store, which seemed to be filled with gag items, restaurants usually did have safe food, unless they were burnt down or staffed by ghosts or something. I was less interested in food, so I decided to go explore the electronics shop. I told everyone where I was going. I felt like I was being pulled there. "Get a TV for the living room," Isaac said. "No, don't do that," Kimberly said. "I hate the Carousel public access channels. They always come on when you're least expecting them to. We didn't have a TV at Camp Dyer, at least not that I saw. What would we have watched?" The bare wire was even more depressing on the inside. It had a few outdated electronics that reminded me of businesses having a going out of business sale. It had one employee with a vest who seemed utterly uninterested in my presence as I walked through the doorway. The music in the store was different from the rest of the outlet mall. The vocals were louder than the music itself, with a strange amateur, improvisational style, as if I were listening to someone singing to themselves. I wasn't interested in any of the actual merchandise or the omens, of which there were only a few. I was mostly interested in the trop items I'd seen peeking through the cracks in the stacks at the back of the store. I wasn't sure if customers were supposed to go back there, but the employee didn't stop me. At first, I thought he was texting at the cash register, but as I walked by, I saw he was playing Snake on a little flip phone. As I walked toward the back, I glanced over my shoulder out the window toward the small food court to make sure I was still visible to my teammates. I should have asked for one of them to come with me, but strangely, I felt very calm. I didn't feel in danger. Then, I started to sort through the trop items stacked up on the thin metal shelves. Oddly, the first thing that caught my eye wasn't a trop object at all. It was an electric cord ending in freight wires wrapped around a metal spear from a spear gun. It was being sold for $2.99, which struck me as a good deal. If only I had a spear gun. After that, I found a large amp with a trop that would make it send a huge blast wave and blow up the speaker if you turned the volume all the way up and then sent sound through it. It was an artist advanced archetype trop called Overloaded. I knew that trop existed in movies. I remembered it from the live-action Ninja Turtles. There was a vacuum cleaner with a ghost hunter trop that allowed it to suck up spirits, but it only worked in comedies. I had yet to see a true comedy horror, though we had come pretty close. The final cut of Delta Epsilon Delta definitely had a humorous tilt to it, though we did not play the part for that. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I was expecting something to be there. I was running on vibes. I had my semi-psychic background trop equipped, but it was often hard to distinguish the effect it had on me from the effect of my scouting trop. Here, though, I definitely felt something, though I probably couldn't have articulated that as I walked through the paths of metal shelves, constantly glancing back out the window to make sure my friends were still there. And then I saw it. Isaac would have been delighted. It was a television. Not a large one. In fact, it was so small that it had a little handle built into the plastic on the top that I could get my fingers behind and carry it. It had a built-in VCR, and though the screen looked small, it was plenty big for watching movies. I would know, because I had one just like it. The brand name was Philips, just like the one I'd had since I was a kid. I couldn't stop staring at it. I checked dozens of times to see if it was some sort of omen tricking me into thinking it was my old television, but I couldn't see anything. The TV was plugged into one of the many outlets around the store, so I reached over and pressed the power button. It didn't come to life immediately, those TVs never did, but I heard it click on, and slowly, the screen came into view, with the letters VCR in the top left corner. I'd watched mine so often that my grandparents made me keep it in the basement so I wouldn't spend all night watching it. Heck, my parents had had the same problem except they made me keep it in the den. Mine had been an old friend. I stared at the buttons. They were so familiar that I knew what they were just from touch. I ran my hand over the screen and felt the static slowly building up over it. Then, I found my way to the VCR slot and casually pushed it open. To my surprise, there was a tape inside. My fingers found the eject button almost immediately, but I hesitated. I needed to make sure the tape itself didn't have any omens because that would be one heck of a trick for Carousel if I'd just pressed play or otherwise interacted with it. But it had no omens, powerful or weak, none to speak of. I worked up my courage and pressed the eject button. When I pulled out the film, I nearly dropped it. It read Candyman. I had watched that movie as a preteen over a dozen times. It was a favorite. It terrified me. As I stared at the television, an entry on the red wallpaper stared back at me. Appropriately enough, the trope attached to the television was called Watch Party. It was a fanatic trope that allowed a film buff to play the movies they normally watched on the red wallpaper on the television instead. That was great news, but I couldn't focus on that. This thing showing up was weird and strangely convenient. And frankly, it freaked me out because I didn't believe this television was just like the one I'd owned growing up and still kept in storage. It was my TV. I knew it was. It was my actual TV. Carousel was messing with me. It constantly prodded me about my childhood, my grandparents, and my parents. To what end? If Carousel was some sort of fear factory or monster prison, I could understand it. But why was it doing this? Why did it care about my family or what happened to me when I was young? This wasn't fear. It was pain. Was it trying to get a reaction out of me? Well, it was succeeding. What was the point, though? Just trying to dredge up old feelings, old memories that I had locked away? My hand moved over the top of the TV affectionately. I took the headphones from my Walkman out of my pocket and plugged them into the TV's audio jack, then put the Candyman VHS back into the VCR. That was how I'd done it, how I'd stayed up watching movies without permission. I'd lie down in a sleeping bag too close to the TV, watching whatever movie I could get my hands on. I'd spent so many nights, so many days, so many hours with that little television, many of them watching that particular movie and dozens of others that I became obsessed with for no reason. I didn't know if this was supposed to be a gift or if, for some sick reason, Carousel wanted to force me to remember one night when I was little, when it happened. When my parents died. This TV was there then, too. I had to wonder if I'd been in my bed at night instead of in the den with my ears covered by headphones watching a scary movie, not Candyman, but another good one, would it have all gone differently? I unplugged the TV and grabbed it by its little built-in handhold. It was $20. I'd pay any price for an old friend. Book 5 Chapter 52 There was a sporting goods store around the last turn of the U-shaped building. It had an appropriately punty name, Dead Sprints. Unfortunately, it was closed down because it contained so many cool objects, and it would be overpowered for us to shop there. After all, sporting implements often made great incognito weapons, even if you weren't an athlete. The atlas didn't say anything about it because trope objects, of which there were tons in there, were new, but the conveniently placed attendant filled us in. They said that the shop's owner had been murdered the night before, so the shop was closed. She gave us details, including a newspaper article. It seemed pretty clear to me that to shop there, you had to run a storyline and save the shop owner the day before you went. So, as we passed by, we could only window shop, staring past the locked doors and shutters at the hockey sticks, golf clubs, mountain climbing axes, and other interesting items, many of which had tropes attached. Oh well. I carried my TV as best I could. We had brought the wheelbarrow in case we found something worth purchasing, but we didn't bring it inside the outlet mall because of the crowd. Luckily, the TV only had a 13-inch screen, and it really wasn't that heavy. Isaac was psyched when I actually bought a TV, and I don't think he even realized it had a trope attached. There was a Halloween-esque shop called the Hem and Haunt, and the strange thing about it was that it didn't appear to have a single omen inside. It had no trope objects, no items of interest at all because it was not a shop in and of itself but rather the setting for an omen that showed up at 3 a.m. I suppose the idea was that people would be disarmed by the lack of danger and then be thrust into a terrible storyline. Who could say? It would have made more sense back in the days when players were struggling to find a place to survive between writs of habitation. Either way, no one would ever want to walk inside, especially because one of the mannequins in the window was wearing what I could only assume was human skin as a costume. However, an employee was standing out front, inviting us in. Her name was Jezebel, and I only remembered her because, like several of the other shopkeepers, she kept telling us one thing: if we don't have what you like, Our sister store at the Carousel Mall is sure to have what you need. I can give you directions, she said, holding out a little pamphlet with a map on it. The actual Carousel Mall was too dangerous to enter, but all of these little shops around town seemed to want to funnel people toward it. One day, we would surely go, but not that day. For most people, the real goal for the trip was just clothes. If those clothes happened to have magic powers inside storylines, that would be cool, but for the most part, that wasn't it. My friends and I lost our clothes whenever Camp Dyer was prematurely shut down, so we mainly wore what we had on us, with the exception of Kimberly, who put in more effort to procure clothes. Still, buying clothes and having a choice in what you wear every day was an important part of staying sane. Personally, I didn't think that my clothes were too bad, considering I'd been wearing them for the better part of a year, according to the calendar that was. In reality, they weren't close to being that old. Much of the damage my clothes ever had was done in storylines and was instantly reversed after the storyline ended. More than that, even though we had apparently spent many months inside the diecast storyline, my hoodie had disappeared when I entered it, so it would still be in pretty good condition even if it weren't for the magical resetting ability that Carousel had. Still, I wanted a new undershirt, and maybe a few backup pairs of socks and other garments would make me feel more at home. I was currently rotating through clothes I had borrowed from various storylines, but none of them were ideal, and none of them were brand new. You do what you have to survive, even if it means stealing undergarments from the characters you play. So shopping was easy for me. I just needed the basics. It was equally easy for Dinah, who claimed she had purchased an entirely new outfit. However, to my eyes, she looked like she was still wearing her brown leather jacket and ripped-up jeans, perhaps a newer version I didn't know. "What?" she asked. "This is what you wear when you don't want people messing with you." She did look tough, but... "You've been murdered in that outfit," I said. She shrugged, still admiring her new jacket, which I still swore was her old jacket. I sat in a small waiting area, my eyes on the door with a good vantage point of the entire store so that I could help look out for omens. In this circumstance, Kimberly was just as good as me because she had memorized this place as well as the rest of the outlet mall. Still, I tried to be useful. There was one of those circular racks with clearance items on it, and a little kid was hiding in the middle of it. The kid was an omen. The storyline was called Us. I was sure Carousel would be hearing from Jordan Peele's lawyers soon. The poster for the storyline featured that same kid, I had to assume, with his face in his hands. Or at least the place where his face should be was in his hands, because as I concluded after a few glances, when I could take them, through the hanging clothes that surrounded him, he had no face. It wasn't like I could see his skull or anything. Where his face should be was blank. He just sat in the middle of that clothing rack, facelessly crying from what I could tell, but there was no noise. Other than that, the clothing store was very delightful. It had a less spooky name, Twisted Threads, and was pretty close to a JCPenney or Dillard's. There were a few things shoppers had to be aware of, like not letting any of the perfume get sprayed on them by those NPCs trying to sell it. There were a variety of storylines that could be kicked off just by having some scent sprayed on you. Unfortunately, from what I could see, none of them involved werewolves. "Riley, check this out," Kimberly said from somewhere to my right. I saw her standing in the aisle, holding a button-up shirt in my direction. It had a drop on it called Impress the Parents that would automatically do your hair, get you all cleaned up, and buff your moxie. Even I could acknowledge how useful that perk was. It was a general drop, but it gave different bonuses depending on whether you were a stud, a beauty, a newcomer, or an underdog. No bonuses for film buffs. "No thanks," I called out. Looking good was not a priority worth giving up the utility of my hoodie. Being able to put my hood up and look like I wasn't paying attention was just too useful. "Why not?" she cried back to me. "It looks good." "I don't want to look like I'm dressed for 4th grade picture day," I called back. She gave me a disappointed look and tucked the shirt over her arm, clearly intent on buying it. But we had to be careful as far as that went. There was so much to purchase at this store, even more than the other places. And there were plenty of drop items at Twisted Threads. Not a lot of them were useful, but there was a legitimately good selection. We could easily waste all of our money here. I decided to stand near the checkout to see what people were buying. No one was supposed to spend more than $10, which was a lot of money in Carousel, especially when you weren't buying specialty items. I had already broken that rule, but the TV was for the group. Actually, it was for me, but the group could use it. Andrew had enough of his own money to afford a drop item, a king with a drop called damaged goods that would cause him to enter a storyline hobbled but strongly buff his grit. That was a pretty good deal for a doctor who mainly used their brain, though he would need to be careful. One of the assets of a good healer was their ability to move around quickly, so he would have to pick his moment carefully. As I stood near the register, a glance around the room showed me several potential buys. There was an umbrella with a seer drop that would guarantee it would rain before a dramatic moment in the storyline. There was eyeshadow with a femme fatale drop for attracting a mark, appropriately called Fatal Attraction. I didn't want to think about that one. There was a plain white t-shirt on a clearance rack, not the one with the crying faceless child under it, that would clean itself between scenes. It was a criminal drop called Above Suspicion. While I had absolutely seen stuff like that happen in movies where people's clothes seemed to get washed as they moved from room to room, it occurred to me how useful a drop like that might be when paired with a betrayal drop that allowed you to act as an ally to the enemy in order to steal their narrative momentum and screen time, or whatever other strategy you were employing that required a betrayal drop. Cassie managed to find herself a really useful drop item. Even though she didn't have enough money to buy it herself, everyone chipped in a coin here and there to help her get it. It was a handheld mirror, so old and beautiful that it could not have come from a store like Twisted Threads in the real world. It had a sleuth drop on it that made it so NPCs and enemies would not see it when you used it to peek around corners. It was a total Nancy Drew drop. The real benefit was that she would be able to use her reflective jump scare drop along with it in order to get to peek at the enemy magically and not just around the corner. All in all, it was a good trip for both our mental health and storyline effectiveness. But, for us, the day was just beginning. Book 5 Chapter 53 The trip out of the outlet mall was just as treacherous as the trip in, but we pulled it off, and I could tell that our mood was better because of this seemingly normal mini-vacation. The wheelbarrow was outside, just where we left it. I quickly walked over and placed my purchases, including my television, inside of it, as did pretty much everyone else. Michael insisted on being the one to push it. He was wearing a sleeveless t-shirt, and he wanted to show off his guns, not just the one tucked in his waistband. As he picked up the wheelbarrow, he glanced at the television, and I thought maybe it occurred to him that it looked an awful lot like televisions back home, but if he realized that, he didn't say anything. Michael mostly talked when he was sarcastic, using dark humor, or angry. Other than that, he was fairly quiet, though I wasn't sure if that was his real personality or if it was just because we weren't close yet. Where to next? Kimberly asked with a smile on her face. For Kimberly, today was about as good as any day in Carousel could get, and I was happy about that. Everyone gathered around, and we explained our next move. Well, I explained it. First things first, I said. We need to get off of this lawn because there's something trying to break up through the grass over there. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, damn. Isaac said, jumping away from where he was standing about 5 feet from whatever it was that was pushing up through the grass. We moved over to the parking lot. Alright, as you all know, the number one priority right now, given our levels and all the things we have to accomplish in the next few months, is that we need to figure out what storyline Logan Mays and Avery Lawson are trapped behind. To be honest, there's not a lot of guidance in the atlas, and frankly, it feels like finding a needle in a haystack. All we know is that it features werewolves, and we know its general location, so we're going to go out and look around. We're going to go to omen shops in hopes that we can find a mobile omen for the story. Everyone nodded in a generally good mood. What are the odds that we find it? Michael asked. It would seem he was yet another person who wasn't comfortable with optimism. "We're going to look until we do find them," Antoine said, "even if we have to turn over every single shop in Carousel. You have my word." Antoine must have been getting bad because he was really laying the gung-ho attitude on thick. "I would say our odds are very small of finding the omen outright," I said, "but I think that if we ask around, there are several ways we can find that storyline. We know that paragons are able to give you tickets to specific storylines, so that's another thing that we'll be trying today. There are no promises being made here." I hated to undercut Antoine's message, but I had no idea what our odds of finding the right omen were. Oddly, if I wasn't mistaken, I thought Michael liked my answer more. I knew that I would if I were in his position. Andrew started to clap and encourage the others in much the same way that Antoine did, although I thought that Andrew was just doing it to humor Antoine. "Show us the way," he said. And I did. Our first stop was a semi-familiar haunt we had been to twice before. It was a little psychic shop in the middle of a strip mall. We were hitting all the different kinds of malls that day except for the real one parking lot that had largely been abandoned. The entire area was overcome with the sounds coming from the first door. Roars and screams. From the outside, it looked like the establishment of any palm reader in any town in the U.S., but I knew that inside, there were powerful things. "Andrew, Michael, and Lila," I said, "you definitely need to go in and talk to her. Your connection to Logan and Avery should help her nonsense work better. The rest of you can either stay out here or go inside and shop, but I'll warn you, there are a lot of purchasable omens in here, and some of them can get you if you're not paying attention. Cassie, if you want to come in and look around for psychic stuff, whatever. Isaac, you're the lookout." I could trust Isaac to be on the lookout, especially in this spot, because I knew that no omens were coming by anytime soon. We had scoped it out before, and the new atlas had some information on it, but it was still good to give him responsibility every once in a while so that he didn't revert to being a slacker. He nodded and seemed to take the job seriously. The psychic shop was exactly as I remembered it, except there was more stuff now, including keepsakes and trop items. Silas, the mechanical showman, was still broken down in the corner. As per usual, after a few moments of browsing through the archaic goods and occult items, Madame Celia made a shocking surprise entrance. "I know why you have come," she said. "Come with me. I will do a reading for you, but be warned, the price will be great, and not just in coin." The price was great in coin too because it cost $40, which was twice as much as I paid for my magic television. Still, this was important, and the cost likely reflected the reward. Likely. "I'm going with them," I said to Cassie. "Use your magic sensing trap not to touch anything that will kill you." "What if it will kill others?" she asked. "Better leave those alone, too, just to be safe," I said. Andrew, Michael, Lila, and I squeezed into a booth in the back of the shop. I didn't really need to be there, but they didn't say anything, and frankly, if she was going to give us some clue, I wanted to hear it myself. I was sure that Andrew would take things seriously and give me a good account, but still. Madame Celia was in a flamboyant mood that day. While she always wore the purple dress and crazy jewelry, she often had a serious look on her face, like she was impatient with ignorant players for not understanding her fortunes. She examined Andrew, Michael, and Lila one at a time. She gingerly reached out, grabbed their hands, and moved her fingers over their palms, around their wrists, and up their arms. "A very skilled doctor," she said, examining Andrew. "You knew violence long before you came to Carousel, I see," she said to Michael. That wasn't too impressive. She was just basically describing their archetypes. She was still examining Michael when she said, "Your anger at Carousel, it's potent. Anger because it trapped you, anger because it tricked you, and anger from a broken heart." "That's not what we're here for," Michael said. He pulled his hand back, and for the rest of the time we were there, he leaned back on the bench as if hoping she wouldn't read him again. "For Lila," she said, "you seek redemption, and you will find it, but perhaps it won't be what you hoped for." I didn't really understand that. Most of Celia's psychic nonsense was less supernatural intuition and more reading the systems of Carousel. I was always under the impression that player choice mattered, so to say that she would obtain redemption implied that either our fate was already sealed or that Celia was saying something generic to try to soothe Lila. After she was done with Lila, she moved on to me. "Back again?" she asked. "Do you have a question you'd like to ask me?" "I thought you said you already knew what we were here for," I said. "I know the question you came with, but I did hope that you would ask another. The last time I was here, Celia and her gimmick left me a little emotional after a non-consensual walk down memory lane." "I repeat what the guy said, that's not what we're here for," I said. "It strikes me that everyone believes they know what they're here for, and hardly any of them are correct. You seek a quester. You seek friends who have fallen. And there are answers to your question, but I am not the one to answer them." She produced a small card from a pocket somewhere in her cloak and handed it to Andrew. "Next, seek your answers here. In Carousel, the story moves wherever you pull the thread, so keep pulling," she said. The card looked like a business card, but it had flowers and little silhouettes of people on it. I couldn't quite see what it was for, but Andrew looked puzzled. "What I can give you is this warning: your friends have all fallen, some here, some there. Till they have risen, you've no friends to spare. Madam Celia, the quest giver, you stop in to get your fate divined, and she outsources it to someone else with some fortune cookie knowledge." I was sure it would all pay off, but I was secretly hoping for a private showing ticket like the one she had given Dinah. That would have made things a lot easier. The story moves in the direction you pull the thread. That was how magic worked in Carousel. The more you pursued a theme or an idea, the more the universe seemed to warp around that mission. They called it a throughline. Silas Dearcon had explained something like that. It was funny how so many things in Carousel all worked that same way, sometimes in small ways, like when improvising in a storyline, and sometimes in big ways, like trying to rewrite the universe or travel back in time. I thought over the poem, and for some reason, I kept instinctively looking at the throughline tracker on the red wallpaper, but it hadn't changed. I still felt something weird about it. Your friends have all fallen, some here, some there. Till they have risen, you've no friends to spare. I thought over the words. This seemed to be a straightforward warning that we couldn't risk losing anyone else until we rescued more people, but that seemed a little cheap for a $40 fortune. I would have to think on it more. My wheels were turning. Will they ever forgive me? Lila asked before we left the booth. Her eyes were red from tears. She had been silently crying next to me. Now, dear, Madam Celia said, they have been betrayed far more than what you've done, and it's possible they'll be betrayed again far worse. I promise you that the night will grow pitch black before the sun begins to rise in Carousel. That wasn't a yes. I slid out of the booth first and walked back out to the front, where Cassie had collected 2 items. The moment I saw her, she looked at me with puppy dog eyes because she didn't have enough money for them. They were not trop items. They weren't keepsakes. She was holding actual cursed objects, with which Madam Celia had taken the proper precautions to negate their harmful qualities, or so the sign on the wall said. Look, you know I have that curios and trinkets trop, Cassie started, and these are the cheapest ones I can buy. I took a deep breath and reached into my hoodie pocket to retrieve some coins. It was an investment. Curios and trinkets was a powerful scouting trap that allowed her to sense the nature of magical or cursed objects by comparison to other magical or cursed objects she already owned. The group would be paid back in information. So what do we got? I asked. This necklace puts you in a coma, she said, holding out a small box with a disassembled talisman inside. It would be far worse than a coma, dear, Madam Celia called as she re-entered the front room. But as it is quite safe. The other item she had was a music box that, from what I could tell, had been superglued or epoxied inside and out so that the music would never play and the little dancer on top would never sway. And what's this one do? I asked. Summons a ghost or demon, Cassie explained. According to the description on the price tag. Yes, That item is very dangerous, which is why we have nullified it. When played, it would bring forth Nyarlathotep of the dark dimension to steal the souls of children and mothers, Madame Celia added, suddenly showing a side of herself I had never seen before, the saleswoman. Apparently, Nyarlathotep had never heard of glue when he made his little music box. They were $15 a piece, which explained why Cassie was treating me like I would turn her down even though buy something here was on the agenda. You're keeping them in your room, I said as I handed her the money. After carefully reviewing every omen in the shop in hopes of seeing Logan and Avery's missing poster appear on the red wallpaper, I had the real posters in my pocket. I found Andrew, who was still staring at the little card he had received. Where was it that Madame Celia is sending us? I asked. He showed me the card. The Teacup Cottage, House of Dolls, it read. A chill went down my spine. Depending on the genre of the story, a doll could be a delightful companion for a child or a terrifying foe. In Carousel, you could always guess the genre. It's not far, Andrew said. Good, I said. We wouldn't want to be tired when we get our souls sucked out. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.